I was halfway to the airport when a wave of panic hit me so suddenly that my heart nearly stopped. My passport. The one thing I absolutely needed for my 2-week vacation in Italy was still sitting on the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker. I had placed it there the night before because I was convinced that putting it somewhere impossible to miss would guarantee I remembered it. Instead, I had walked right past it. I leaned forward and tapped the driver lightly on the shoulder. "I'm so sorry," I said, handing him an extra $20 bill. "Could you please turn around? I forgot something important." The driver nodded without complaint and made a careful U-turn. This vacation meant more than sightseeing. It was the first real trip I had planned since my husband, Richard, passed away 3 years earlier. After decades of sharing every holiday together, traveling alone felt strange, but staying home had become even harder. Every room carried memories, and every quiet evening reminded me of the life we had built together. I needed fresh air. I needed distance. Most of all, I needed to remember who I was outside of grief. When the taxi pulled into my driveway, the neighborhood was still wrapped in the silence of early morning. Dew sparkled across the lawn, and the rising sun painted everything with a soft golden glow. "I'll only be a minute," I told the driver. "Please keep the engine running." He smiled and nodded. I hurried across the damp grass toward the side entrance, hoping to grab my passport without disturbing anyone. Then I heard voices. At first, I assumed neighbors were chatting nearby, but as I stepped closer, I recognized them immediately. My daughter, Olivia, and her husband, Brandon. They were sitting comfortably on my patio furniture with steaming mugs of coffee. They each had a spare key to my house, supposedly for emergencies, though lately they treated my home more like an extension of their own. Instinctively, I stopped behind the wooden lattice hidden beneath blooming hydrangea bushes. "I think she'll sign it," Brandon muttered while scrolling through something on his phone. "She trusts you," Olivia sighed. "We just need her signature before she comes back from Italy. Once she's a co-signer, the bank can use this house as collateral." Brandon nodded. "Exactly. Since the mortgage is already paid off, it's perfect security." Olivia stirred her coffee without looking up. "We'll tell her it's an investment for the kids. She never says no when it's about her grandchildren." Brandon chuckled. "And after that, convincing her to move into one of those retirement communities shouldn't be difficult. This place is way too big for one person." "We'll manage everything," Olivia replied. "She doesn't need a house this size anymore." They clinked their coffee mugs together as though celebrating. My chest tightened. For a brief moment, I couldn't breathe. I had spent the last 3 years helping them whenever they needed support. I paid for groceries, covered unexpected bills, bought school supplies for the children, watched my grandchildren almost every weekend, whenever Brandon's business struggled. Somehow I became the solution. I believed I was helping family, standing there. Hidden behind the flowers my husband had planted years earlier, I realized something painful. They didn't see me as their mother. They didn't see me as a grandmother. They saw an opportunity. I slowly stepped backward, careful not to make a sound. There was no urge to confront them, no desire to scream, no tears came. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. Richard used to tell me that anger often gave dishonest people exactly what they wanted. A chance to twist the story and make themselves the victim. I wasn't going to give them that chance. Quietly, I entered through the front door. The familiar scent of cinnamon candles and polished oak welcomed me inside. Sunlight streamed across the hardwood floor, exactly where Richard used to read the newspaper every morning. My passport was still resting beside the coffee maker. I picked it up, slipped it into my handbag, and glanced around the kitchen. Everything looked exactly the same, yet nothing felt the same anymore. Without making a sound, I locked the front door behind me and returned to the waiting taxi. As we drove away, I looked back through the rear window. The house Richard and I had spent 40 years building slowly disappeared from view. But what stayed with me wasn't the house. It was the conversation I could never unhear. By the time my flight took off, my phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Hope you're having a wonderful trip already, Mom. Brandon and I stopped by to check on the house. Don't worry about a thing. We left a little surprise for you in the refrigerator. Love you. I stared at the message for several seconds. Then I switched my phone to airplane mode and tucked it deep inside my purse. High above the clouds, as the plane carried me toward Italy, I made a silent promise to myself. When I returned home, my life would never look the same again. Italy greeted me with warm sunshine, ancient architecture, and a peaceful rhythm that felt worlds away from the tension I had left behind. For the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for solving someone else's problems. There were no unexpected phone calls asking for money, no last-minute requests to watch the children, and no endless worries about whether Olivia and Brandon were making wise decisions. Instead, there were quiet mornings with fresh coffee, narrow cobblestone streets waiting to be explored, and the comforting realization that I finally had time to think. As I wandered through Rome's historic neighborhoods, I replayed the conversation I had overheard outside my home. Every sentence echoed more clearly than before. They hadn't spoken with concern. They hadn't discussed helping me. They had calmly planned how to convince me to risk everything I owned. The more I reflected on the past 3 years, the more unsettling details surfaced. Twice every month, I paid for Olivia's groceries because she claimed money was tight. When Brandon's truck needed expensive repairs, I covered the bill without hesitation. Every weekend, I canceled my own plans to babysit so they could enjoy evenings out together. On birthdays, holidays, and school events, I always reached deeper into my savings to make sure my grandchildren never went without. None of those sacrifices had bothered me at the time. I believed that was what family did. Now I questioned whether my kindness had simply become an expectation. One afternoon, while enjoying lunch at a quiet cafe overlooking the Mediterranean, I opened the notebook I always carried during trips. Instead of writing about museums or beautiful landscapes, I began making a different kind of list. Protect the house, separate every financial account, palm every spare key, set clear boundaries. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no emotional speeches, no arguments. People who manipulated others were skilled at turning every discussion into an opportunity to avoid responsibility. I refused to play that game. Several days later, while staying in Florence, I carried my laptop to another small cafe and connected to the secure wireless network. I logged into my online banking account. The checking account I shared with Olivia still contained more than $20,000, money Richard and I had saved over many years for unexpected repairs and emergencies. Before making any changes, I reviewed the recent transactions. Within minutes, my stomach tightened. There were purchases I didn't recognize. $400 at a sporting goods store, $200 at an expensive salon. Several smaller withdrawals spread across the previous weeks. No one had asked permission. No one had even mentioned them. Apparently, they assumed I wouldn't notice. Or perhaps they believed the money already belonged to them. Without hesitation, I transferred every dollar into a brand new account opened solely in my name. I intentionally left $5 behind so the joint account would remain active. That way, Olivia wouldn't receive an automatic notification that it had been closed. Next, I canceled the debit card connected to that account. The process took less than 10 minutes. Years of financial dependence ended with a few careful clicks. I leaned back in my chair and felt something unexpected. Relief. Not guilt, not sadness, just relief. Later that afternoon, my phone vibrated with another message. Hi, Mom. Brandon's truck needs another repair. I'm going to use some money from the emergency account. Hope that's okay. Love you. I looked at the screen. Then I smiled. For the first time, there was nothing she could access. I slipped the phone back into my purse without answering and ordered a fresh espresso. The silence felt liberating. Before leaving the cafe, I made one more important call. I contacted a professional locksmith near my hometown and arranged for every exterior lock on my house to be replaced the day before my return flight. Front door, back door, garage entrance, every lock. I even requested heavy-duty deadbolts with upgraded security. The appointment was confirmed within minutes. As evening settled over Florence, I strolled through an art gallery filled with centuries-old paintings. People admired masterpieces created to withstand the passage of time. Looking around, I realized that homes were much the same. Strong foundations meant little if the doors were left open to those who intended to take advantage. Richard used to say that protecting your home wasn't a sign of distrust, it was a sign of wisdom. For years, I had ignored that lesson because I believed family deserved unlimited access. Now I understood the difference between love and permission. One could exist without the other. As the sun disappeared behind the rooftops, I walked back to my hotel feeling lighter than I had in years. My vacation was almost over. But something else had ended as well. The woman who believed she had to rescue everyone was staying behind in Italy. The woman returning home knew exactly what needed to change. My flight landed on a cool Tuesday afternoon. As the taxi turned into my neighborhood, I felt a mixture of anticipation and determination. The vacation had given me more than beautiful memories. It had given me clarity. I was no longer returning home as the woman who apologized for protecting herself. I was returning with a plan. The first thing I noticed when the taxi stopped was the polished brass deadbolt shining on my front door. The locksmith had done exactly what I requested. Every exterior lock had been replaced, and every old key had become useless. I smiled quietly as I unlocked the front door with my new key. The house felt peaceful. After unpacking my suitcase, I made a pot of tea and settled into my favorite chair beside the living room window. The familiar view of the front yard looked exactly as it always had, but I knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. I was right. The following morning, just after 8 o'clock, a silver SUV rolled into my driveway. Olivia stepped out carrying a cardboard tray with 2 cups of coffee. She walked confidently toward the front door, clearly expecting to let herself inside as she had done countless times before. From my chair, I watched without making a sound. She slipped her old key into the lock. Nothing. She tried again. The key refused to turn. A confused frown spread across her face. She jiggled the handle harder before pressing her shoulder against the door. Still nothing. Finally, she knocked loudly. I waited a few moments before opening the door just enough to stand in the doorway. "Good morning," I said calmly. She looked startled. "Mom, what's wrong with your door?" "My key doesn't work. I replaced the locks while I was away." Her smile disappeared. "You forgot to give me the new key." "I didn't forget." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I didn't make extra keys." Olivia laughed nervously, convinced I was joking. "Come on, Mom. What if I need to get inside? What if there's an emergency?" "If there's an emergency," I replied evenly, "you call me first. If I need help, I'll let you know." Her expression hardened. "But I've always had a key. That arrangement no longer works for me." She stared at me as though she had never seen me before. "Are you upset about something?" "I've simply decided I want more privacy." The answer wasn't what she expected. She had likely prepared herself for an argument. Instead, I offered only calm certainty. Without another word, I accepted one of the coffees from her tray. "Thank you for stopping by," I said politely. Then I gently closed the door. The new deadbolt clicked firmly into place. 2 days later, the second conversation arrived. I was trimming roses in the backyard when the side gate slammed open. Olivia marched across the lawn, her face flushed with anger. "You emptied the joint account." I placed my gardening shears on the stone path before looking at her. I transferred my savings into a personal account. "My debit card was declined at the grocery store," she snapped. I had a full cart of food. Everyone was staring at me. "I'm sorry that happened." She folded her arms. "Why would you do this without telling me?" "Because the money belonged to me." Her voice grew louder. "We've always shared that account." "No," I corrected gently. "I allowed you access to my account." She looked stunned. "There isn't a difference. There is now." She took a frustrated step forward. "Brandon's business needs help. We're behind on the mortgage. We were depending on that money." I met her eyes without raising my voice. "I've spent years helping your family, Olivia. But your mortgage, your business expenses, and your household bills are your responsibility. You've never said no before." "I know." What changed? For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I answered honestly. I finally realized that helping someone and supporting their dependents are 2 different things. She shook her head in disbelief. You're acting completely differently. Perhaps I should have acted this way sooner." Her patience disappeared. "You have a paid-off house and savings in the bank. Why are you suddenly being so selfish?" The word barely registered. Instead, another sentence caught my attention. "We already had plans for the future." I looked at her steadily. "You mean the plan where I signed a business loan and this house became collateral?" Every trace of color vanished from her face. She froze, her lips parted, but no words came. "I heard everything before leaving for Italy," I said quietly, "the conversation on the patio." Tears instantly filled her eyes. "Mom, you believed I was gone." She lowered her head. I picked up my basket of gardening tools. "I think our conversation is finished." Without another word, I walked toward the house. Behind me, I heard only silence. For the first time since Richard's passing, I realized something important. Protecting my peace wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of self-respect. I knew Brandon wouldn't accept losing control without a fight. He had always believed confidence could solve every problem, even when it crossed the line into entitlement. For years, I had mistaken that confidence for determination. Now I recognized it for what it truly was. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. The following evening, I was washing dishes after dinner when the doorbell rang repeatedly. Whoever stood outside wasn't waiting for an answer. The loud, impatient presses echoed through the house. I dried my hands and walked to the front door. Through the glass, I saw Brandon standing on the porch with his arms crossed and his jaw clenched. His expression made it clear that he hadn't come for a friendly visit. I opened the wooden door but left the metal security door locked. "Good evening, Brandon." "We need to talk," he said sharply. "We can talk right here." His eyes narrowed. "Open the door." "I'm comfortable speaking this way." He let out a frustrated breath. "Olivia told me what you've been doing. You changed the locks, emptied the bank account, and embarrassed her. What exactly are you trying to prove?" "I'm protecting my finances and my home." He laughed bitterly. "Your finances? Everything we've done has been for this family." "No," I answered calmly. "Everything I've done has been for this family." He ignored the correction. "My business is going through a rough patch. We only needed temporary help. You've received temporary help for several years." His face reddened. "I've repaired your gutters, cut your grass, and handled jobs around this house. Don't act like you owe us nothing." "You mowed my lawn a handful of times using my lawnmower and my gasoline," I replied. "That hardly gives you ownership of my property." He stepped closer to the security door. "We already had plans for this house." "I know. You heard that conversation. I heard enough." For the first time, Brandon looked genuinely uncomfortable, then his confidence returned. "You're getting older, Margaret." The words hung in the air. "This house is too much for one person. Eventually you'll need help whether you admit it or not." I looked directly into his eyes. "If that day comes, I'll make my own decisions." He pointed toward the garage. "I still have tools stored in your shed, and our patio furniture is in your basement. Don't touch any of it. You have until Sunday at noon to collect your belongings." His eyebrows shot upward. "Or what?" "After noon, anything left here will no longer be my responsibility." For several seconds, we stared at one another. Without another word, I closed the wooden door and locked it. His muffled complaints faded as he walked back to his truck. I returned to the kitchen and finished washing the dishes. The conversation hadn't upset me. Instead, it confirmed I was doing exactly what needed to be done. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine. True to form, neither Olivia nor Brandon had contacted me. I suspected they believed I would eventually give in, just as I always had before. This time was different. After breakfast, I opened the garage and began moving every one of their belongings. Boxes filled with old clothes, unused holiday decorations, a heavy tool chest, several sets of worn tires, broken patio chairs they had promised to repair years earlier. Piece by piece, I carried everything to the edge of the driveway. Once everything was stacked neatly beneath a waterproof tarp, I secured it with bungee cords to protect it from the weather. I had just finished when a familiar SUV sped into the driveway. Olivia climbed out quickly and opened the rear doors. My 2 grandchildren stepped onto the sidewalk carrying backpacks before I could speak. She hurried toward me. "I've got to work," she said. "Brandon has an important meeting. You'll need to watch the kids until this evening." She started guiding the children toward my porch. "I have plans today," I replied. She barely paused. "You're retired. Your schedule is flexible." Without waiting for an answer, she turned back toward her vehicle. "See you around 5. The SUV disappeared down the street before I could say another word. My grandchildren looked at me with confused expressions. None of this was their fault. They had simply been placed in the middle of an argument they couldn't possibly understand. I smiled warmly. "Well," I said gently, "it looks like we're going for a little drive." Their faces brightened immediately. I helped them into my car, buckled their seat belts, and started the engine. I wasn't taking them home, and I certainly wasn't canceling my plans. Instead, I drove directly to the medical office where Olivia worked. If she wanted to leave her children without asking for my agreement, then she could explain that decision herself. As the clinic came into view, I parked the car and took each child by the hand. Together, we walked toward the front entrance. The receptionist looked up as my grandchildren and I entered the medical clinic. The waiting room was spotless, and the quiet conversation stopped as several people noticed 2 young children walking in with an older woman. Olivia stood behind the reception desk discussing paperwork with a coworker. The moment she saw us, her face lost all color. She hurried around the counter and met us before we reached the waiting area. "Mom," she whispered urgently, forcing a nervous smile. "What are you doing here?" I answered calmly. "You left your children on my porch without asking if I was available." She glanced toward her coworkers, clearly hoping they weren't listening. "I told you I had to work, and I told you I already had plans." She lowered her voice even more. "Please take them back to your house. I'll pick them up after my shift." I shook my head. "My home is no longer an emergency daycare whenever it's convenient for you." Her expression shifted from embarrassment to frustration. "I don't have anyone else. You should have arranged childcare before leaving them." She opened her mouth to argue but quickly stopped when she realized several patients were now watching the conversation. I smiled at my grandchildren. "Go give your mother a hug." They ran to Olivia, who embraced them tightly. I wished the children a wonderful afternoon, turned around and quietly walked toward the exit. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't embarrass her. I simply returned the responsibility that had always belonged to her. As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I wasn't solving problems that someone else had created. I was allowing adults to face the natural consequences of their own decisions. The following Monday brought another unexpected change. A traveling physical therapist named Claire arrived with 2 suitcases and a warm smile. She had signed a 6-month lease for my spare guest suite, complete with its own private entrance. After we completed the paperwork, I handed her a set of keys. "I hope you'll be comfortable here," I said. "It's perfect," Claire replied. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity." Almost immediately, the house felt different. It no longer echoed with memories alone. It felt alive again. That afternoon, another pickup truck pulled into my driveway. Brandon climbed out first, followed by Olivia. Without knocking, Brandon walked toward the side entrance carrying one of his storage boxes. I stepped onto the porch. "Can I help you? We're moving our things back inside until we find another place to keep them," he said. "I'm afraid that won't be possible." "Why not?" "Because someone already lives there." At that moment, the side door opened. Claire stepped outside wearing hospital scrubs and carrying a travel mug. She smiled politely. "Good afternoon." Brandon froze. Olivia stared in disbelief. "You rented the room?" she asked. "I did, to a stranger?" "To a tenant," I corrected gently. "She pays rent, respects my home, and contributes to the household." Neither of them spoke. "The belongings under the tarp are still yours," I continued. "Please load them before tomorrow morning." Silently, Brandon began lifting boxes into the truck. For once, there were no arguments, no threats, no demands. Only quiet acceptance that the situation had changed. Over the next 6 months, life settled into a peaceful routine. Claire became a wonderful housemate. We often shared dinner before her evening shifts, exchanged gardening tips, and occasionally watched old movies together. The extra rental income strengthened my savings and reminded me that my home could provide security without sacrificing my independence. Olivia called from time to time. At first, every conversation centered on money or favors. Each request received the same calm answer. "I'm sorry, but I can't help with that." Eventually, the requests became less frequent. Instead, we began meeting twice each month at the local park or library so I could spend time with my grandchildren. Those visits were filled with laughter instead of obligation. Slowly, our relationship found healthier boundaries. Brandon rarely contacted me again. Surprisingly, I didn't miss the conflict. One warm spring evening, I sat on my back patio watching the sunset color the sky in shades of gold and lavender. Fresh flowers surrounded the garden Richard and I had planted decades earlier. Claire waved goodbye as she left for work. I smiled and waved back. The house felt peaceful, not because everything in life was perfect, but because peace finally lived inside me. Losing Richard had taught me how precious time truly was. Discovering Olivia and Brandon's plans had taught me something equally important. Love should never require surrendering your independence. Kindness should never become permission for others to take advantage of you. Healthy boundaries do not destroy families. They reveal which relationships are built on genuine respect. As the porch light illuminated the front walkway, I realized I was no longer afraid of being alone. This house wasn't simply the place where Richard and I had built our lives. It was still my home, and for the first time in many years, every key in my pocket belonged exactly where it should.